My name is Cora, and I'm 70 years old, born in Stillwater, Arkansas, a town so small it barely made it onto county maps. My daddy named me Cora because it means heart, and he said I'd be the heart of this family someday. Back then, I thought it was too sentimental. Now I feel every beat of that name deep in my chest. Frank was my everything. I met him at a church picnic when I was 17, a quiet boy with work-worn hands who brought me watermelon and said, "You have a nice smile. Miss Cora?" We married under an oak tree behind his family's barn. I wore a borrowed dress that smelled of lavender, and our wedding feast was ham sandwiches and cornbread I'd baked myself. We built a life together. Small, hard, but ours. Frank worked 3 jobs during the factory strikes, while I kept house and raised our 3 children. We didn't eat unless the kids were fed first. Sometimes Frank would skip dinner and say, "Let them grow strong. We'll be okay." I remember the winter we ran out of heating oil, and Frank wrapped us all in blankets while we shivered together until morning. Then came the cancer. Stage 4, the doctor said, cracking my world open. I sold our truck, borrowed from the church fund, sat by Frank's bedside as he disappeared before my eyes. The night before he died, he whispered, "Promise me you'll eat well and don't work yourself to death." I nodded, though my throat burned. 2 years have passed since that February morning when I buried my Frank. 2 years of living alone in our creaky house, eating soup from cans, talking to his photograph. The savings account holds barely $3,000, and the roof leaks worse every winter. The house feels too big and too empty, but I convinced myself I was managing fine. Last month, everything changed. A man from the county development office knocked on my door, clipboard in hand, talking about a new federal highway cutting through this part of Arkansas. Eminent domain, he said. Compensation for my parents' old plot of land next to the house, the little patch where Daddy used to plant corn, now just wild grass and rabbit trails. $185,000. I sat down hard when he said the number. I hadn't seen that many zeros in my entire life. This wasn't money I'd earned. This was land passed down from folks who came before me, folks with dirt under their nails and hope in their chests. I folded the official letter into my recipe book behind the chicken pot pie page, not ready to speak it into existence. The phone call came 3 days after I'd hidden that letter. "Mom!" Ethan's voice crackled through the old rotary phone, sounding tired in a way that worried me. "How are you doing out there?" "I'm doing all right. Sweetheart, still kicking?" "Listen, I was thinking. Why don't you come stay with us for a while? Claire and I were talking, and it's time you stopped living alone. We can make room." My heart jumped. Someone was thinking of me, wanting me around. I thought back to little Ethan waiting on the front steps when I worked late at the bakery, clutching his flashlight and a bag of day-old rolls. He never complained, just wrapped his arms around me and asked, "Did you eat yet, Mama?" What I didn't know was the desperation behind that invitation. Ethan had been laid off from the packaging plant 6 months earlier. Their savings were gone. They were 2 months behind on rent. And Claire was drowning in postpartum depression after their second baby. When Claire overheard the phone call, she saw opportunity-free childcare, housekeeping, cooking, maybe even access to whatever money the old woman had stashed away. Claire's own mother had abandoned her when she was 12, leaving her with a grandmother who resented the burden. She'd never learned what maternal love looked like, only what obligation felt like. In her mind, that's what family was. People using each other until someone became more trouble than they were worth. But I heard none of that context. All I heard was my son saying he wanted me there. And after 2 years of loneliness, it felt like being invited back into the world of the living. "I'll pack light," I told him. "Won't be any trouble at all. Don't worry about that. Mom, your family." Family. The word wrapped around me like a warm blanket. The Greyhound to Chicago took 14 hours, and by the time I arrived, My knees felt like rusty hinges. Ethan picked me up in a rusted pickup that coughed black smoke. I barely recognized the boy I'd once cradled, his hair streaked with premature gray, deep lines carved around his eyes. I wanted to touch his cheek, but I held back. I was here to ease burdens, not add to them. The apartment building was narrow brick with faded green railings and overflowing dumpsters. 3 flights up, no elevator. And I was breathing hard by the top, clutching my single suitcase. Claire stood in the doorway, barefoot, stirring something while scrolling her phone. She glanced up briefly. "Oh, you're here." Her voice was flat, already drifting back to the screen. I smiled and held out my jar of peach preserves. "I brought this for the children." She half nodded and set it on the counter without looking. The living room was chaos. Toys everywhere, TV blaring, baby crying from the next room. "Quiet down," Claire called without moving. "Grandma's here." The way she said grandma made me feel like a stranger who'd already overstayed her welcome. That first night, I lay on the narrow couch, listening to the city's endless noise, sirens, traffic, the neighbors' music bleeding through thin walls. The cushions smelled like spilled juice and cigarettes. Through the bedroom door, I could hear Claire crying softly and Ethan's tired voice trying to comfort her. I stared at the cracked ceiling and told myself this was temporary. They were struggling, overwhelmed, dealing with more than I understood. I could help. I could make things easier. Wasn't that what mothers did? The baby started crying again around 2 a.m. I heard Claire groan, heard Ethan mumble something about his turn. I slipped off the couch and padded to the nursery. The baby, little Marcus, was red-faced and furious, tiny fists waving. "Shh, sweet boy," I whispered, lifting him carefully. "Grandma's here." I walked him around the dark apartment, humming the same lullaby I'd sung to Ethan 30 years ago. Marcus settled against my shoulder, his breathing evening out. For a moment, in the blue glow of the streetlight, I felt useful again. Needed. From the bedroom doorway, Claire watched silently. When I looked up, she was gone. The next morning, no one mentioned the midnight feeding. Claire handed me a list of groceries and said, "The store's 6 blocks down. Marcus needs formula, and we're out of milk." It wasn't a request. I took the list and my own money, walking 6 blocks in shoes that pinched, carrying heavy bags back while my lower back screamed. When I returned, Claire was on the couch scrolling her phone while the baby cried in his bouncer. I started to understand I wasn't a guest here. I was unpaid help who happened to share their DNA. Within a week, I'd become the invisible foundation holding their household together. Up at 5 a.m., old farm habits die hard, long before anyone else stirred. My body ached from the narrow couch, but I found purpose in familiar rhythms: coffee brewing, breakfast prepared, lunches packed for Ethan's job interviews. I walked Marcus to daycare each morning, 6 blocks there and 6 back, carrying the heavy diaper bag and my own secret aches. Claire never offered to drive me, even when it rained. "The walk's good for you," she'd say without looking up from her phone. Grocery shopping became my daily expedition, carefully counting coupons and calculating prices. I used my own Social Security check for food they'd never thank me for. Claire would hand me lists written in demanding scrawl. "Get the good bread this time, not that cheap stuff. And Marcus needs the organic formula." Afternoons meant laundry in the building's basement, dragging heavy baskets up and down those 3 flights. My knees protested each step, but complaining felt selfish. I was helping family through a hard time, temporary. I told myself, just until things improved. Evenings were endless cycles of cooking, feeding children, cleaning up while everyone else watched TV. I'd stand at the sink scrubbing pots, listening to their shows through the thin wall, feeling more invisible with each passing day. "Thanks, Mom," Ethan would mutter without looking up from his laptop. Claire rarely acknowledged the meals, The clean clothes, the countless diaper changes. When I suggested maybe finding a small part-time job to contribute financially, she laughed. At your age? Besides, we need you here with the kids. The message was clear. My value lay in what I could do, not who I was. Sleep became elusive on that lumpy couch. I'd lie awake listening to the city's endless noise, my hip bones grinding against the metal frame, wondering how I'd gone from Frank's beloved wife to this, an unpaid servant in my own son's home. One evening, while washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back looked hollow-eyed and bent, like someone carrying invisible weights. I barely recognized myself. "Mom, can you quiet Marcus down?" Claire called from the living room, where she lay sprawled across the recliner. "I have a headache." I dried my hands and went to the screaming baby, lifting him with arms that shook from exhaustion. As I bounced him gently, I realized something that should have been obvious. I wasn't helping my family through a rough patch. I'd become their solution to avoiding responsibility. 3 months into my stay, insomnia struck with vengeance. I lay on the couch at 2 a.m., staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a bird in flight. My head throbbed, a deep, persistent ache that aspirin couldn't touch. I slipped off the couch and tiptoed toward the kitchen, trying not to wake anyone. The floorboards groaned under my weight despite my efforts to move like a ghost. Living in someone else's space had taught me to minimize my presence, to exist in the margins of their lives. As I passed Ethan and Claire's bedroom, I heard voices, soft but sharp, like glass breaking under water. I should have kept walking, but something about the way Claire said, "Your mother," froze my feet to the linoleum. "I'm exhausted. Ethan, I work all day, come home to chaos, and she's always there, sprawled out in our living room like she owns the place." My breath caught. That living room where I'd been sleeping on a couch that left permanent marks on my hip, where I'd carefully folded my belongings into the smallest possible space. Claire's voice grew more bitter. She keeps talking about helping with money, but where is it I haven't seen a single cent? Just talk while we're about to be evicted. I pressed my back against the wall, heart hammering. The $185,000 from my parents' land sat in my savings account, untouched. I hadn't mentioned it because it felt sacred. Soil my father had worked with his own hands, turned into numbers on a bank statement. I wanted to help, but I also wanted it to be my choice, not an extraction under pressure. "If she leaves," Ethan said, his voice carrying a weariness that cut deeper than anger. "Who's going to watch the kids cook and clean? You want to do all that on top of your job." Those words shattered something in my chest. Not just the sentiment, but the tone, as if I wasn't his mother anymore, but a convenient appliance too useful to discard. Claire laughed, short and harsh. "So we just keep her around for the free labor god. Ethan, listen to yourself. She's not a person to you anymore. She's just help. What choice do we have?" Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "We can't afford rent, can't afford daycare, can't afford anything. At least this way we're surviving." "Surviving," Claire repeated. "Your mother's not living. We're not living. We're all just existing in this misery together." I stood there in the dark hallway, listening to my son and his wife carve away my dignity piece by piece. They weren't cruel people. They were drowning people who'd grabbed onto me like a life raft, not caring if I went under in the process. I didn't cry. Even tears felt too dangerous in this space where every sound might wake someone who'd resent the disturbance. I crept back to the couch and lay awake until dawn, staring at that water stain and feeling like I was disappearing, one conversation at a time. The next morning, I made pancakes and sliced apples just the way the children liked. My hands trembled as I poured orange juice, but I kept my voice steady. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said when Ethan shuffled to the kitchen. He grunted, already focused on his phone. No one mentioned the conversation I'd overheard. No one asked how I'd slept or noticed the dark circles under my eyes. I was background furniture that occasionally needed feeding, but something had shifted during that long, dark night. The last threads of hope I'd been clinging to had finally snapped. I wasn't a guest here, wasn't even family, really. I was a resource being consumed until nothing remained. 2 days after overhearing that conversation, I decided to make one last attempt at genuine connection. At breakfast, while everyone mechanically consumed the eggs and toast I'd prepared, I cleared my throat. "I've been thinking about that money from selling my parents' land back home," I said carefully. "I could contribute to your expenses, help with rent, groceries, maybe start a college fund for the little ones." Claire's head snapped up from her phone, eyes suddenly bright with interest. For the first time since I'd arrived, I had her complete attention. "Oh my God, Mom, really? How much are we talking about?" When I mentioned the amount, she nearly choked on her coffee. "That could solve everything. You should just transfer it to our account. I'm really good with managing finances, and this way we can handle all the bills together. Make it simple." Something cold settled in my stomach. I was thinking more of helping month by month, contributing what I can while keeping the principal safe. Her smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch. "What? You don't trust us? After everything we've done for you?" Her voice rose, and Marcus started crying in his high chair. "You come here with nothing, live rent-free, eat our food, and when it comes time to actually help, you're suddenly suspicious." I looked at Ethan, hoping for support, for his voice to join mine in reasonable discussion. He stared at his laptop screen, jaw clenched, saying nothing. That silence hurt more than Claire's accusations. "That's not what I meant," I said quietly. "I just want to be careful." "Careful?" Claire stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We're about to lose our apartment, and you want to be careful. How selfish can you be? We've given you a home when you had nowhere else to go." The baby's crying intensified. The older child started whimpering, sensing the tension. Still, Ethan said nothing. He wouldn't look at me, wouldn't defend his mother against accusations of selfishness for wanting to maintain some control over her life savings. "I work 40 hours a week," Claire continued, her voice shaking with anger. "Come home to take care of kids and cook dinner, and you just sit around all day watching TV. The least you could do is help us financially." The lies hit me like physical blows. I hadn't watched TV once since arriving. I was up before dawn and worked until bedtime, caring for their children, cooking their meals, cleaning their messes. But in Claire's narrative, I was a lazy burden grudgingly tolerated. Still, Ethan remained silent. "I need some time to think about it," I said finally. "Time?" Claire's laugh was bitter. "We don't have time. The eviction notice is sitting right there." She pointed at a crumpled paper on the counter. "But sure, take your time while we lose everything." That evening, I quietly packed my small suitcase. I told them I needed to visit my cousin Louise for a few days, just to get some fresh air and perspective. Claire looked relieved. "That's probably a good idea. Mom, a little space might do everyone some good." Ethan finally spoke. "How long will you be gone?" I met his eyes for the first time in days. "I don't know yet." The next morning, as I wheeled my suitcase toward the door, only little Marcus came running. He wrapped his arms around my legs, sticky fingers clinging to my skirt. "Bye-bye, Gamma. Come back soon." I knelt down and kissed his forehead, my hands trembling as I smoothed his hair. "Be good for Mommy and Daddy, okay?" From the kitchen, Claire called out without turning around. "Have a safe trip, Mom. Take all the time you need." The emphasis on all wasn't lost on me. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I watched the apartment building disappear behind us. For the first time in months, I could breathe fully. I wasn't running away. I realized I was finally running towards something, though I didn't yet know what that might be. The bus back to Arkansas felt like traveling through time, leaving concrete and car horns for rolling hills and the sweet scent of hay. When I called Louise from the Maplewood station, she didn't ask questions. "Come home, honey. I'll put fresh sheets on the spare bed." Louise lived in a weathered cabin on the edge of town, about 20 miles from my old home in Stillwater. She was fighting her own battle. Her husband, Jim, had Alzheimer's. Good days mixed with terrible ones where he didn't recognize the woman he'd loved for 45 years. Some mornings he'd call her by her sister's name. Other days he'd accuse her of stealing his belongings. "You look like hell," Louise said bluntly as I sat at her kitchen table that first evening, my suitcase still by the door. Thin as a rail and sadder than a kicked dog. "What did they do to you up there?" I told her everything. The overheard conversation, the demands for money, the way I'd become invisible in my own son's home. Louise listened without judgment, occasionally reaching across to squeeze my weathered hands. "You know what I think," she said when I finished. "I think you forgot who you were before you became somebody's wife and mother. Maybe it's time you remembered." The first week, I helped Louise with Jim's care. He was a big man, gentle but confused, sometimes agitated when reality shifted around him. I understood the exhaustion in Louise's eyes, the way caregiving could consume you until nothing remained but duty. "At least you chose this," I said one evening as we sat on her porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "I chose to care for Frank because I loved him, what I did in Chicago. That wasn't love. That was just being used." "Difference between helping and enabling," Louise agreed. "You enabled them to avoid growing up." Her words stung because they were true. By taking over all their responsibilities. I'd allowed Ethan and Claire to remain children while their own children suffered the consequences. Gradually, in the quiet of Louise's cabin, I began to remember who I'd been before I became everyone's solution. I cooked because I enjoyed it, not because someone demanded it. I tended Louise's vegetable garden because the soil felt good in my hands, not because it was expected. For the first time in years, I moved through days without checking if someone needed something from me. "You're looking better," Louise observed after 2 weeks. "Got some color back in your cheeks." She was right. I'd been holding my breath for months. And finally, I was learning to exhale. Louise's grandson Ben was home from college for summer break, a lanky 20-year-old who seemed permanently attached to his phone. One afternoon, he found me in the kitchen making my grandmother's biscuit recipe from memory: flour, buttermilk, and lard mixed with hands that knew the proportions by feel. "Grandma Louise, look at this," he called out excitedly. "Mrs. Cora's cooking looks just like those videos everyone watches online. You should totally film this." I laughed, shaking flour off my hands. "Ben, who wants to watch an old woman make biscuits?" "Are you kidding? Food videos are huge on TikTok, and everyone loves grandma content. Come on, just try it once. What's the worst that could happen?" So I humored him, mostly to see his enthusiasm. Ben propped his phone against a stack of cookbooks, and I felt ridiculous talking to the tiny camera while mixing dough. My hands shook. I stumbled over words, and I kept glancing at the viewer count in the corner, usually between 8 and 15 people. "Welcome to, Grandma Cora's kitchen," I said uncertainly. "Today I'm making buttermilk biscuits the way my grandmother taught me." The first video got 12 views and 2 comments. "Nice recipe," and "You remind me of my Meemaw." I nearly gave up right then, convinced this was foolishness. But Ben encouraged me to try again. "It takes time to build an audience. Mrs. Cora, just be yourself and tell your stories." For 3 months, I posted videos twice a week. Most got 20 to 30 views, a handful of comments from people who seemed genuinely interested in the recipes. I felt like I was talking to an empty room, performing for ghosts. "Buttermilk cornbread?" I'd say to the camera, trying not to feel self-conscious. "My mother made this every Sunday after church. She'd say cornbread without buttermilk was like a song without melody." The comments were sparse but kind. Love your stories. Can you share the recipe? You have such a peaceful voice. Still, I nearly quit dozens of times. Maybe I'm too old for this. I told Louise one evening after a particularly discouraging week where my highest view count was 23. It's not about the numbers, she said firmly. It's about having something that's yours. When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to, not because someone else needed it? She was right. For the first time in years, I had something that belonged entirely to me. The camera didn't demand more than I could give. The viewers didn't expect me to clean up after them or sacrifice my sleep for their comfort. I could be myself, just Cora, telling stories while making food that connected me to my past. Slowly, very slowly, the numbers began to climb. 30 views became 50, then 75. I started recognizing usernames in the comments, regulars who seemed genuinely interested in my life. You should tell more stories about your husband, one viewer suggested. The way you talk about him is beautiful. So I did. I talked about Frank while kneading bread, shared memories of our early marriage while canning peaches. I spoke about loneliness and loss and the strange journey of starting over at 70. Grief, I said to the camera one day while stirring soup, isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry, like a stone in your pocket, always there, but eventually it becomes part of what makes you who you are. That video got 150 views and a dozen heartfelt comments from people sharing their own losses. For the first time, I felt connected to something larger than my own small world. After 6 months of posting videos, something fundamental shifted. Maybe it was practice making me comfortable on camera, or maybe I'd finally relaxed enough to let my personality shine through. I started telling stories while I cooked, memories of Frank, tales from my childhood, reflections on life that seemed to spill out naturally. Today, I'm making cornbread the way my mother taught me, I said to the camera, mixing batter in the same yellow bowl I'd used for 40 years. She always said you could tell a woman's character by her cornbread. Too dry meant she was stingy with love. Too sweet meant she was trying too hard to please folks. That video got 500 views, my highest number yet. The comments section filled with people sharing their own family recipes, their own memories of grandmothers who'd taught them to cook with love instead of just ingredients. Gradually, my audience grew. 1,000 subscribers became 2,000, then 3,000. People started asking if I sold my preserves and pickles, the same jars I'd been making for decades, just because I enjoyed the process. Ben helped me set up a simple system: mason jars of homemade goods mailed in careful packaging. The first month, I sold 30 jars of peach preserves and apple butter. The second month, 60. It wasn't much money, maybe $300 after shipping costs. But it was mine, money I'd earned with my own hands, my own knowledge, my own effort. For the first time since Frank died, I bought myself something purely for pleasure, a soft purple cardigan from the department store in Little Rock. When I wore it in my next video, dozens of people commented on how happy I looked. "Mrs. Cora, you're glowing." One regular viewer wrote, "That color is beautiful on you." I'd forgotten what it felt like to dress for myself, to choose something because it made me feel pretty rather than practical. The income grew slowly but steadily. By my 10th month of videos, I was making $800 monthly from preserve sales and the small monetization TikTok provided. It wasn't enough to live luxuriously, but it was enough for independence, enough to buy my own groceries, pay for my own clothes, contribute to Louise's household without feeling like a burden. "You're different," Louise observed one evening as we sat on her porch, watching her husband Jim work peacefully in the garden. "Lighter somehow." She was right. The constant knot of anxiety I'd carried for months had finally loosened. I wasn't dependent on anyone's approval or afraid of being too much trouble. I had my own purpose, my own income, my own small corner of the world that valued what I had to offer. The community forming around my videos felt more like family than my actual family had in years. Viewers checked on me when I was late posting, shared their own cooking disasters and successes, sent pictures of recipes they'd tried based on my instructions. "Thank you for reminding me to call my grandmother," one young woman wrote. "Your videos made me realize how much wisdom I've been taking for granted." Comments like that meant more than any amount of money. I wasn't just making videos anymore. I was creating connections, bridging generations, proving that experience and stories had value in a world obsessed with youth and novelty. The video that changed everything was one I almost didn't post. It was a rainy Thursday evening, and I was feeling particularly melancholy. It would have been Frank's 72nd birthday. Instead of my usual recipe demonstration, I just sat at Louise's kitchen table with a cup of tea and spoke from my heart. "I've been thinking about loneliness today," I said to the camera, my voice soft and unsteady. "Not the kind where you're alone in a room, but the kind where you're surrounded by people who don't really see you. I spent months living with family who needed my hands but not my heart. I talked about feeling invisible, about cooking meals no one thanked me for, about cleaning messes that reappeared the next day while I disappeared a little more each week. I spoke about the difference between being needed and being valued, about how caregiving can become a prison when it's expected rather than appreciated. I want you to understand," I said, looking directly into the camera. "This isn't about anger or bitterness. It's about remembering that every person, no matter how old, no matter how tired, deserves to be seen as more than just what they can do for others." The video was longer than usual, nearly 15 minutes, and more personal than anything I'd shared before. I worried it was too sad, too heavy for people who came to my channel for comfort. It got 100,000 views in 3 days. The comments section exploded with people sharing their own stories about feeling invisible, about difficult family relationships, about the challenge of maintaining dignity while aging in a youth-obsessed culture. Dozens of viewers said they were calling estranged parents, visiting elderly neighbors, or reconsidering how they treated the older people in their lives. "Grandma Cora," one comment read, "You just opened my eyes to how I've been treating my own mother. Thank you for your honesty." Another wrote, "I'm 45 and going through a divorce, and I needed to hear that it's never too late to rediscover who you are." Local newspapers picked up the story. The regional TV station wanted an interview. Suddenly, I was being called an inspiration. Though I'd never set out to inspire anyone, I was just trying to find my way back to myself. The Arkansas Senior Citizens Association invited me to speak at their monthly meeting. Standing at that small podium, looking out at faces lined with their own stories of loss and resilience, I felt a purpose I'd never experienced before. "Growing old isn't the end," I told them. "It's not even the beginning of the end. It's a continuation, a chance to discover parts of yourself that were waiting patiently while you were busy being what everyone else needed." The speech was recorded and shared online, adding another wave of attention to my growing platform. Messages poured in from adult children expressing guilt about their treatment of aging parents, from elderly people feeling empowered to set their own boundaries, from families working to rebuild relationships based on respect rather than obligation. I realized I'd become something I never intended: a voice for people who felt voiceless. A reminder that dignity doesn't have an expiration date. "You're famous now," Ben said, showing me my subscriber count, 45,000 and climbing. "I'm not famous," I corrected gently. "I'm just finally visible." November brought an early freeze to Arkansas, coating Louise's garden in silver and making the world look fragile. I was reaching for a jar of preserves on the highest kitchen shelf when the step stool slipped out from under me. I fell hard, my ribs connecting with the counter edge with a crack that sounded like breaking kindling. Louise found me on the linoleum 20 minutes later. conscious but unable to move without excruciating pain. "Don't try to get up," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I'm calling an ambulance." The X-rays at Maplewood General showed 2 fractured ribs and severe bruising along my left side. Dr. Patterson, who delivered my youngest 40 years ago, shook his head with concern. "At your age, we need to watch for complications. I want to keep you for observation." For 3 days, I lay in that narrow hospital bed, watching the door and hoping. Ben had posted on my social media that I was hospitalized, and hundreds of strangers sent flowers, cards, and well wishes. My online family rallied around me with love and concern that felt more real than anything I'd experienced in Chicago. But my phone never rang with a call from Ethan. Louise sat beside my bed every day, bringing updates from home and homemade soup in a thermos. "Maybe they don't know," she suggested gently on the second day, but we both understood the truth. In the age of social media and instant communication, silence was a choice. "I posted it everywhere," Ben confirmed, showing me the responses on his phone. Facebook, TikTok, even tagged Ethan directly. There's no way they didn't see it. On the 3rd evening, as I stared at the ceiling tiles and listened to monitors beeping in other rooms, clarity struck like lightning. My children only wanted me when I was useful to them. The moment I became someone who might need care instead of providing it, I ceased to exist in their world. The realization didn't bring anger, just a cold, clean understanding. I'd spent months making excuses for their behavior, telling myself they were overwhelmed and struggling. But struggling people still managed to call their mothers in the hospital. Busy people still found 5 minutes to check on the woman who'd raised them. "I need to make a video," I told Louise when she arrived the next morning. "Honey, you should rest." "No," I said, sitting up carefully and reaching for my phone. "I need to say this while I have the strength." The video I recorded from my hospital bed was unlike anything I'd ever made. Pale from pain medication, my voice hoarse but determined. I spoke directly to the camera with a clarity that surprised even me. "Hello, my dear friends. This is going to be my last video. And I want to tell you something important about family, love, and knowing your worth." I talked about falling, about lying in a hospital bed for 3 days without a single call from Chicago. I spoke about the difference between being someone's mother and being someone's convenience, about the realization that some people only love you for what you can provide, not for who you are. "I've learned something these past months," I said, my words deliberate and measured. Being useful isn't the same as being valued. Helping isn't the same as being loved. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop enabling others to take you for granted. I shared the truth about my time in Chicago, the overheard conversation, the demands for money, the way I'd been treated like hired help rather than family. I wasn't speaking from bitterness, but from a place of hard-won wisdom. "If you have elderly parents," I said, looking directly into the camera, "please don't wait until you need something to remember they exist. If you are an elderly parent, please don't sacrifice your dignity for someone else's comfort. We all deserve to be loved for who we are, not what we can provide." The video ended with me saying, "Thank you for seeing me when my own family couldn't. You've given an old woman back her voice, and that's a gift I'll treasure for whatever time I have left." Ben posted it with the title, "A Mother's Final Message When Family Forgets Your Worth." Within 6 hours, it had 50,000 views. By Monday morning, it had reached 500,000. The comments section became an avalanche of shared stories, outrage on my behalf, and declarations of love from strangers who felt like family. But more importantly, it was shared and reshared until it found its way to Chicago, to Ethan's Facebook feed, to the phones of his coworkers and Claire's friends who recognized the names they'd heard in passing. Suddenly, everyone in their world knew exactly how they'd treated Ethan's mother. The video sparked conversations across social media about elder care, family obligations, and the invisible labor performed by aging women. News outlets picked it up. Blog posts analyzed it. I'd accidentally started a movement simply by telling my truth. They appeared on Louise's porch 7 days after the video went live, looking like defendants arriving for sentencing. Ethan had dark circles under his eyes, and Claire clutched a bouquet of wilted grocery store flowers with hands that trembled visibly. I was sitting on the porch swing, moving carefully because of my ribs, when their rental car pulled into the gravel driveway. For a moment, we all just stared at each other across the years of hurt and misunderstanding. "Mom," Ethan said when he reached the porch steps, his voice cracking on the single word. "We saw your video. We came as soon as we could get time off work." I looked at them for a long moment, these people who had reduced me to a function, who had let me lie in a hospital bed without acknowledgement, who were here now only because public shame had forced their hand. "Come in," I said quietly. "Louise is making coffee." We sat in Louise's living room, an awkward triangle of chairs with decades of hurt hanging in the air between us. Claire spoke first, words tumbling out through tears she'd been holding back for days. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I was dealing with depression after Marcus was born, and I was overwhelmed with everything, and I took it out on you. I know that's not an excuse, but I want you to know I never meant to make you feel unwanted." "Yes, you did," I said calmly, my voice steady, despite the pain in my chest. "You meant exactly what you said that night. You kept me around because I was useful, and when I stopped being useful enough to overlook my existence as a person, you wanted me gone." Ethan leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "Mom, I failed you completely. I should have protected you. Should have stood up for you against anyone, including my wife. I was so focused on our problems that I forgot you're a person with feelings, not just help." "I see that now," I replied. "But where were you when I was in the hospital? Where was the phone call, the text message, even just to ask if I was okay?" They had no answer for that. Claire cried harder, and Ethan stared at his hands. "We know we don't deserve forgiveness," he said finally. "But we want to try to make this right. Please tell us how." The conversation lasted 4 hours. There were more tears, theirs, not mine. There were explanations about financial stress, about Claire's mental health struggles, about feeling overwhelmed and making choices they now regretted. I listened with the patience of someone who had already done her grieving. "I understand you were struggling," I said when they finished. "But so was I. I had just lost my husband, my home, my entire life as I knew it, and I came to you hoping for family. Instead, I found employers who didn't pay me and barely acknowledged my existence." That evening, after Ethan and Claire had checked into Maplewood's only motel, I sat on Louise's porch watching the sunset over the Arkansas hills. The air smelled of wood smoke and late-blooming chrysanthemums, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace with my decisions. "What are you going to do?" Louise asked, settling into the chair beside me with her evening coffee. "I'm going to forgive them," I said without hesitation. "Not because they deserve it, but because I deserve to be free of anger. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean going back to the way things were." The next morning, I met Ethan and Claire at Maplewood Diner. Over coffee and eggs I didn't cook, I laid out my terms for our future relationship. "I will be your mother, and I will love you, but I will not be your employee." I said clearly, "If you want me in your lives, it will be as family, not as free labor. That means regular visits. You come here for weekends, or I come there for short stays in a hotel room. It means video calls with the grandchildren, holiday celebrations where I'm a guest, not the cook and cleaning crew." I paused to sip my coffee, letting them absorb this new reality. "As for money, I've already set up college funds for the children, managed by the bank. I'll also help with genuine emergencies, but not monthly bills or lifestyle choices. You're adults. Figure out how to support yourselves. And there's one non-negotiable condition: you both need to see a family counselor. If you can't learn to communicate with each other respectfully, you'll never learn to treat anyone else with respect. Claire nodded eagerly, still crying occasional tears. Whatever you want, Mom. We just want you back in our lives. One more thing, I said, looking directly at Ethan. If you ever again treat me like hired help, this conversation ends permanently. I'd rather have no relationship with my grandchildren than teach them that it's acceptable to use people who love you. Ethan reached across the table and took my hand. I love you. Mom, I'm sorry it took a viral video and public humiliation for me to remember that you're a person who deserves respect. I love you too, I said. But love isn't enough anymore. Love without respect is just obligation, and I'm done being anyone's obligation. They stayed for 3 more days, meeting their mother's new life, seeing the community I'd built from the ashes of their neglect. On their last evening, as we sat on Louise's porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Claire said quietly, I hope someday I can make you proud of me. I hope so too, I replied. But first, you need to be proud of yourself. Figure out who you are when you're not overwhelmed, not depressed, not angry. That's the person I want to know. 6 months later. My phone rings every Sunday evening. Ethan and Claire call to update me on their lives, to let me talk to my grandchildren, to ask advice they actually listen to. They're in counseling, working through issues that went much deeper than financial stress. Claire has found medication that helps with her depression, and Ethan has a new job that pays better and stresses him less. They've visited twice, staying at the motel, respecting my space, treating me like family instead of staff. It's not the relationship I once dreamed of, but it's real in a way that fantasy never was. As for me, I have 75,000 subscribers now, a steady income from my food business, and a book deal to compile my recipes and stories. I speak at conferences about aging with dignity, about setting boundaries, about the difference between helping family and enabling them. But more than any external success, I have myself back. I am Cora again, not Frank's widow, not Ethan's mother, not anyone's free labor. Just Cora, a woman who learned at 70 that it's never too late to demand your worth, never too late to start over, and never too late to discover that the most important love you can cultivate is the love you give yourself. Some evenings, I sit on Louise's porch and think about that desperate woman who once believed her only value lay in what she could do for others. I feel compassion for her, but I'm also grateful. Without her pain, I never would have found my strength. Without losing myself completely, I never would have learned who I really am. The fireflies dance in the twilight. My coffee grows cold in my hands. And I am, for the first time in decades, completely content with my own company. That, I've learned, is the truest victory of all.